From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. Out of Oklahoma State University, Derrell will provide this week's comments on the cattle market trends. Among other things, he'll talk about the impact of this winter's rough weather on feedlot cattle gains and subsequently beef production here in 2019. Then this week's Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State focuses on the problems that the cold, muddy conditions are creating for cow-calf producers and cattle feeders. Featured are K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, and Dustin Pendell. And for this week's 4-H segment, Britton Rucker talks with Jake Worcester of the Kansas 4-H Foundation about the foundation's current activities. All this and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome once again to Agriculture Today on the K-State Radio Network. A load of things to talk about concerning the cattle markets once again. And for that, we go down the line to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and visit once more with livestock economist Derrell of Oklahoma State University. Derrell, let's just quickly recap this past week's trade. It's been rather tranquil, a few gyrations here and there, but nothing major.
No real, major moves in the market. Of course, the market is dealing a little bit with some weather impacts, a little disruption there. And I think that's kind of the situation. We've got a little bit of tightness in supplies that's helping support the market right now as far as fed cattle prices, and boxed beef prices for that matter. And they kind of play into the seasonal tendencies this time of the year, but no major changes in this market right now, just sort of marching along.
Since you got right to it, let's talk about the impact of this winter on feedlot cattle gains and subsequently beef production here in 2019. Are those going to start to register here at some point?
I think we're probably seeing a little bit of that impact in the short run here. Just the logistical movement of cattle in these kind of conditions has been interrupted a little bit. Obviously, cattle go on off feed when weather gets cold, and as it stays cold or you have a series of storms, it disrupts their performance a little bit. So we're seeing a little bit of that impact now, but I think we will continue to see that impact for some time forward. When you have a lengthy period of adverse weather conditions, there's a bit of a cumulative effect compared to a single storm, perhaps, and I think we'll probably see some fairly long tails over the next several weeks in terms of carcass weights and the flow of cattle getting back on track here as we finish out these cattle and move them on through the feedlot.
Will this then resonate throughout the year in as far as overall beef supplies, do you think?
By the end of the year, I'm not sure we'll be able to see very much change as a result of this. This changes the timing, and there is some loss of production that you never get back, but really we're pushing cattle off. We're eventually going to slaughter them. I mean, we've had some additional death loss, no doubt, in the storms, but that's not a major issue in terms of the overall numbers. So I don't think on an annual basis that will be that big a deal. I think it's probably more of a first quarter, perhaps even on into the second quarter, kind of a temporary or a shorter term impact.
Speaking of cattle feeding, we might as well slip in here the USDA's latest cattle on feed report, and it's been a while since we've had one of these. And the numbers were interesting, but there's a caveat to this in that this data is a month or so in arrears, Derrell.
That's right. The February 22nd cattle on feed report was not for the month of January, which is what it was scheduled to be. It's actually for the month of December in terms of placements and marketings, brings us up to date for conditions on January 1. So it's a month old now. If you run down those numbers right quick, Placements were down 1.8%, and that's a little more than expected. Most of the analysts put out pre-report estimates back in January, even though we knew at that point we weren't going to get the report. But we did know already that we'd had some weather impacts and so on. Marketings in December were down slightly, about 0.6%, a little bit lower than expected, but pretty close. On-feed inventory as of January 1 was 11.7 million head. That was up 1.8%. So, again, if it were a current report, we might put a little bit of bullish spin on this from the placements being a little bit lower, but it's far enough out of date now, and we've had a lot of weather impacts, and we're really trying to sort through those in our minds right now. So I don't think this report will probably have a lot of impact. USDA is scheduled to release the February cattle on feed report. Kind of confusing now with all these dates, but on March 8th, in about 2 weeks, we'll get what should have been the report that would have come out this last Friday, and then by March's normal cattle on feed release date, we should be caught back up. So I really don't think this report will have a lot of impact just because it is kind of old news at this point.
All right, and for the record, the Kansas numbers from that cattle on feed report released Friday. The inventory overall was up 2% from last year at 2.33 million head. Placements at 395,000 head in December, down 1% from 2017. And marketings were up 1% from last year at 410,000 head. Once more, those were the Kansas cattle on feed figures. The USDA has been extraordinarily busy in the last few days cranking out numbers, in large part relating to their World Agricultural Outlook Forum staged this past week. And as we're looking at factors influencing the cattle market and profitability to cattle feeding, the feed grain production numbers from the USDA might suggest that more corn acreage and production will turn up in 2019. That must bode well if that materializes for cattle feeding profitability, Derrell.
I think so. I think we continue to see favorable feed prices, certainly concentrate feeds from a feedlot perspective, as well as protein feeds. And so, we continue to see favorable conditions. Feedlots have done a good job for quite a few months now of cranking through these cattle. They have lots of incentive when feed prices are attractive to keep that feed mill humming, to run cattle through. It leads sometimes to concern that we're going to overfeed these cattle because feed's relatively cheap. But in fact, as long as there's a plentiful supply of feeder cattle and they're priced relatively right in terms of the margins, feedlots actually have been turning over cattle pretty well, keeping the finishing weights in check and still running more cattle through the system. And at this point, it looks to me like we will continue to do that. Will continue to help us work through the remainder of these, slowly growing supplies of cattle that we're going to have in 2019.
Do want to draw as well from another topic that you've addressed in a recent article on cull cow prices. This is something that you rather routinely track, and tell us what that trend is right now.
Sure. Normally, if you look at the seasonal pattern on cull cow prices, and it's one of the most pronounced of all classes of cattle have fairly pronounced seasonal patterns, but cull cows typically advance sharply from a November low, kind of sideways in December, start to increase, but then January into February into March, we see a significant seasonal price increase in these cull cow prices, and it looks like we're starting to see that now. There's been a significant advance in the last 4 to 6 weeks here in these cull cow prices. So I think we're seeing that. Now, last year in 2018, we did see that seasonal increase into March, but the second half of last year, we saw relatively weak cull cow prices. They peaked fairly abruptly in about March and then just sort of tailed off the rest of the year. They normally hold pretty high through the summer and don't fall off until we get into the fall period. So I guess the question going forward that I'm getting from producers is, will we see a more typical seasonal pattern this year? I think there's a good chance we will. I'm expecting, at least in my projections, to see cull cow slaughter actually decrease slightly in 2019. We've kind of peaked out. We've got cow culling back up to normal rates. So I think we probably take some of that pressure off of getting these culling and slaughter rates back up to sort of normal longer-term levels.
All right. Haven't talked about beef exports yet. Are you seeing anything of any interest lately happening on that front?
Well, again, the latest data that we got was for November. Again, with the delays we've had from the federal government, the November data was really a continuation of the strong export picture that we had seen earlier in the year. It wasn't up as much on a year-over-year basis for that month, tailing off a little bit at the end of the year. When we get the December numbers, then we'll have our annual totals. I think beef exports are going to wind up being up about 10 to 10.5% on a year-over-year basis. That follows about a 12% increase the year before that and about a 13% the year before that. And at the same time, imports have been flat for the last 2 years, and they were down the year before that. So the net effect there is we're getting a very positive boost in cattle markets from the net trade picture. That's been a key to helping the market absorb increased beef production so far, and it will continue to be important as we go into 2019. We're still expecting probably a slight increase, perhaps a more modest increase in beef exports in 2019. Obviously subject to a fair amount of question marks regarding some trade policy issues, and we have to watch things like exchange rates to make sure that doesn't change the picture.
But from the proverbial 30,000-foot view, it just seems as if the factors are aligning reasonably favorably for the cattle sector as we roll deeper into 2019 from the economic standpoint.
I think so. Again, we're probably peaking out this cyclical expansion. We've still got some modest increases in beef production projected for 2019. Demand has been very good relative to that the last 2 years. It looks like it will continue. There are these sort of external dark clouds hanging around out there, but unless something materializes out of those that's negative, there's every reason to expect that we continue to really enjoy pretty good situation. It's not a banner situation. We do have bigger supplies that we're dealing with, but being able to maintain kind of a sideways general trend in cattle prices in a situation where we've increased beef production as steadily as we have the last 3 or 4 years has been pretty impressive. And again, I think that continues in 2019, even though we probably are looking at more modest increases in the supply side pressure there.
Good input as always. And Derrell, thanks for your time and your comments. We'll catch up with you again in a few weeks from now.
Sounds good.
He is livestock economist Derrell Peel, Oklahoma State University, and he's included in our round-robin group of agricultural economists who visit with us routinely about the cattle market trends each Monday here on Agriculture Today. After this break, our friends from the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State will offer up their thoughts on managing cattle through these sloppy, muddy conditions that prevail around Kansas right now. That's next here on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Agriculture Today continues now, and next for you, the team from the Beef Cattle Institute here at Kansas State University assemble for another BCI Cattle Chat. We share excerpts from each of those podcasts as they address timely subjects in the area of cattle production and health management. Mike's side this time, veterinarians Bob Larson and Brad White, and livestock economist Dustin Pendell. Brad leads things off.
We're going to talk today, it's coming up to spring, so we're going to talk some about management techniques for dealing with scours, some of the environmental management techniques. We'll also talk about mud, which ties right in there together. Maybe I'll start out with this. How big a concern is mud?
I think mud is a pretty big concern from a health standpoint. So as a veterinarian, and there's really two aspects of that. One is young calves are particularly susceptible. So when they're very young, first 48 hours of life, first day to 2 days, if they stay wet, get muddy, they're just not able to deal with cold temperatures. So if you have cold and mud together, that's particularly hard on a very young calf. Now, when they get a little bit bigger, they're likely to survive, but it's still hard on them, makes them more susceptible to calf scours, to pneumonia later in life, those types of things. So from a health standpoint, particularly young calves, it's a pretty big risk factor.
But in a feeding environment, if we're in a I was going to say dry lot, but a confined environment that's muddy. If we've got an apron there, that's much better, so having a concrete thing for them to stand on. But your feeding requirements can increase by up to 10%. And we will see in the cows where we get around the bale rings and there's a lot of congestion, they may not want to go eat in those areas. What do we do to manage it?
Yeah, I think, first of all, just take it really seriously. And so some of the things we can do are get the tractor and scraper out and scrape those aprons, scrape around the feeding areas. And again, depending on the situation you're in as far as this dry lot or confined area, how much space do you have? And try to move feeders around. So if you have a concrete apron, obviously you're not going to move that. But if you've got bale rings or something that you can move, to move them around so that the cattle don't congregate in the same area for the entire feeding period, for the entire winter. So basically trying to be creative about anything you can do to clean off mud and stuff.
There's a balance there because every spot I move that round bale feeder,
Now I've torn
up that spot, and it's going to kill out my grass in that area. The other consideration is it's going to be muddy. How quickly is it going to dry out? That depends on the drainage. So did I put it on the side of the hill? Did I put it at the top of the hill? Did I put it down in a low spot where it's going to just stay there? Where you place those bales is also important.
Yeah, and and I would say that again, sometimes we do things from habit and we get busy. So even things like building new gate entries into a pasture or into a smaller grass trap or something, because a lot of times the reason I'm putting the bales there is because that's near the gate, and it's maybe very difficult to get across a creek or something on the other side to move them. So. And that's better done at another time of year necessarily than right now. I don't want to go out and dig post holes this time of year. But to think about how can I set this pasture up to minimize the mud? Because we're not going to get rid of mud, but we're just trying to keep it down to where it's having minimal effect on the cattle.
Absolutely. And the confined environment, scraping the pen, mounds, places that the cattle can get out of the mud. But still, as Dustin mentioned, that big increase in the energy requirement, which I think we all understand can make a huge difference.
I think the fastest I've ever seen a group of cows lose weight is when they're on a relatively poor forage in a muddy situation, and the quickness that they lose body condition is really quite alarming.
So let's talk about one of the things that goes along with mud, which when we have new calves being born, calf scour is always a concern. We've talked about it a couple times on this show, but calf scours is one of the things that we worry about and want to manage. And we mentioned on a previous show, one of the best ways to manage that is the Sandhills calving system. Bob, you want to talk a little bit about, just maybe tell us, what is the Sandhills calving system?
Well, first of all, you got to give a shout out to the guys at the University of Nebraska that kind of created this, or they put into words this system of moving cows, pregnant cows, away from the cows that have already calved. So you'll need multiple calving pastures. So the Sandhills system basically is you start with all the cows that are pregnant in one pasture, and for 2 weeks, let them calve out. And then after that, into that first 2 weeks, you move all the cows that have not calved away, and they go into a new pasture. Let them calve there for a week. And then basically every week after that, you're moving the cows that hadn't calved away from the cows that had already calved.
So you're saying if I have a 10-week calving season, I'm going to need 10 pastures?
Yeah. And that's, you identified one of the challenges of actual implementation.
And how big are these pastures?
Basically, it would depend on if most of your calves are born in the first month of the calving season, then actually the first couple pastures need to be bigger because they're going to contain more cows for a longer period of time. And so they don't all have to be the same size. And it depends. How much of their forage need are they getting from the pasture, or are they really truly kind of a grass trap and you're delivering feed? So the size will depend on the feeding situation. And the size certainly isn't the same size for every week, because as you go through the calving season, there should be fewer and fewer cows calving each week, and so I need smaller pastures as we move along.
But they still have to have water, and you still, at this time of year, if they're calving, you got to have feed delivery. And tell me the reason that works.
The reason that works is they made a really good observation, which, I kind of kick myself when someone else sees something that I should have seen. But basically, calves born very early in the calving season, even if the weather's tough, even if they're born to a heifer, those calves are the ones that don't get sick. So basically, if you're born very early in the calving season, they're just not around other calves that are scouring. They're just not exposed to very many of the germs that cause scours. And the risk just increases. So the calves that are born the 6th and 7th and 8th week of the calving season are at much higher risk of scours than those that are born in the first 2 or 3 weeks of the calving season.
It's exposure. It's exposure because that's where they're getting it.
They're getting it from their
older ones,
from their cousins out there, their brothers and sisters in the herd. That's where they're getting the germs, and it builds over the length of the calving season. So the concept behind the sandhill system is basically each group of cows gets to, in their pasture, their calves are born in the first week of the calving season. And so it really works extremely well. The downfall is exactly as you identified, is for full implementation, it takes a lot of pastures, and that may just not quite be possible.
So can I do it with less? Can I recreate some of the value by having just a couple pastures?
I would say yes. And again, I think the more pastures you have, probably the less risk of scours you're going to have. But even just once half the calves are born, start the second half of the calving season in a new area, or after a third of the calves, so that I have 3. So if you can split it into 3 different calving pastures, and again you can just count as soon as 1/3 of the cows have been calved, then move the remaining 2/3 and then do that again. I think
move the pregnant ones.
You move the pregnant ones, which actually is a whole lot easier than trying to move pairs.
That's right.
And then those calves that were born already, they stay on that pasture with their mother, and I'm moving pregnant cows without calves yet. And even if I can do that 2 or 3 or 4 times, that gives me tremendous benefits that approach that of having 9 or 10 pastures. Maybe not quite as good, but it's good enough to make that effort.
It'll make a huge difference. And even, what about in the midst of an outbreak? So I've got several scouring calves. Can I go ahead and implement a move at that point to the cows that haven't calved?
Absolutely. I think if you're in the midst of a scours outbreak, a couple of things I'd like to do is, first of all, I'd love to be able to move the entire herd to someplace clean. All right? If you can't do that, at least move the ones that have not calved yet and get them out, because then, again, we'll start the season over again. And although I'll be battling scours for a little bit longer in the group that's already born, the ones that haven't calved yet, they get to kind of start over, and the risk in that group will go way down. And so, depending on how many pastures so if I'm in the midst of a scours outbreak right now, if I had 3 pastures, I'd move the ones that have already calved to pasture 1, the ones that are still pregnant to pasture 2, and then a group that is scouring, that we're dealing with, I'd move them to pasture 3 so I can keep them separate from everybody else. If I only have 2 pastures, then I would use 2 of those.
So you can make a big difference by segregating, moving the pregnant cows, having them calve in a clean environment, and that prevents that exposure to some of those older calves, which leads us right into our Cattle Chat checklist, which is going to focus on what are our top 5 tips for managing calf scours and preventing calf scours.
Yeah.
I'll start out. Number 5, be able to identify those sick calves and manage them appropriately. So if I have scouring calves, find them and manage them appropriately.
All right, number 4, make sure those cows are in good body condition so the nutrition is good for the cows. That impacts the colostrum quality that they'll give their calves and the risk of having calving difficulties, so cow nutrition.
Number 3, managing calving pasture density. And by that, we're just referring to, keep the feed, the water, your bale rings, keep that separate so they're using all the pasture and they're not all just congregating in one location.
Number 2, separate younger calves from older calves. So it doesn't have to be a full Sandhills calving system, but do as much as possible to keep those younger calves separate from the older calves.
And so number 1 kind of builds off of that, and that is make every week of the calving season like the first week, or at least as close to that as you can implement.
From the Beef Cattle Institute at K-State, Brad White, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Larson. Listen to the Cattle Chat podcast in full at beefcattleinstitute.org. We'll be back shortly here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
This is Agriculture Today, broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. Now for you in brief, today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, President Trump yesterday said he would delay that increase in tariffs on Chinese goods set to take effect at the end of this week, citing substantial progress on issues including intellectual property and technology transfer after a weekend of talks. The president wrote that should progress continue, the U.S. would plan a summit with President Xi Jinping of China to conclude that agreement that would settle this year-long trade fight between the two nations. He did not specify how long the extension of a trade truce would last or any date for that potential summit. U.S. tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods had been scheduled to rise to 25% this Saturday. In recent talks, Beijing offered to increase purchases of U.S. farm and energy products and services, as well as ease restrictions on U.S. firms in financial services and auto manufacturing, and improve protection of U.S. intellectual property rights, according to those briefed on those discussions. The president tweeted that the progress involved intellectual property protection, technology transfer, agriculture, services, currency, and many other issues, without offering any details. Also on the trade front, harsh words about European Union's approach to ag trade issues and high hopes for a bilateral deal with Japan were aired by key U.S. ag trade officials during a discussion on the trade agenda at the USDA's Outlook Forum. USDA Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs Ted McKinney and Chief Agricultural Negotiator at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative Greg Dowd participated in that event. Both have been involved in ongoing U.S.-China trade talks and defended the Trump administration strategy on a range of trade issues. McKinney said, quoting here, "I firmly believe trade is a two-way street. Fair is fair and free is free, and that's what we must aspire to when forging trade policy." Optimism about the U.S. ability to ink that bilateral trade deal with Japan was voiced by both men. Time is of the essence, though, according to Dowd, for the U.S. to cinch its own agreement with Japan and to protect its market share there. Big gathering for you cattle producers here in Manhattan at week's end. Agriculture Today's Britton Rucker reminds us of it. Britton?
Eric, coming up this Friday, K-State will host the 106th Cattlemen's Day at K-State. The event is set for Friday, March 1st at Weber Hall and will begin at 8 in the morning. To speak more on the event and its keynote speakers is beef cattle specialist for K-State Research and Extension and one of the co-coordinators of the event, Dale Blassie.
It's our university's and specifically our department's celebration of our dominant industry here in the state of Kansas, and an opportunity to show our shareholders and young people aspiring to join the beef industry to see new research opportunities within the department and to bring together our allied industry guests as well as our producers who we strive to serve. We try to serve as a bellwether to different issues that are coming down the road and provide a good objective platform to hear the issue straight out and allow our shareholders to be aware of the situation and to make plans accordingly for whatever that may be.
One of the keynote speakers at the event will give insight on whether or not plant-sourced or cultured meat, or both, could make inroads in the beef market.
That's a big issue, and it's really has caused a lot of folks to scratch their heads in terms of trying to get around it. We've seen what's happened on the dairy industry side. And so, again, we've reached out and we've invited Dr. Brad Morgan to keynote this address of the plant source and cultured meat products that are there. We feel like we got a good person there to address this particular issue. Again, something to provide our stakeholders an opportunity to think about things that are important for our particular industry in terms of ensuring that we have long-term vitality and viability in our particular industry.
Complementing Brad Morgan's presentation will be K-State's Glenn Tonzer. He will be covering the beef market outlook and alternative protein offerings.
Dr. Glenn Tonzer got his thumb on the pulse pretty well. He's able to address a lot of various issues from international trade, the competition from other alternative proteins, and he just does a nice job of tying a bow around all the issues for folks to hear.
That was K-State beef cattle specialist Dale Blassie. In addition to these keynote speakers, there will be multiple breakout sessions throughout the day, including topics such as beef quality grading, antibiotic stewardship in animal agriculture, and much more. For more information on Cattlemen's Day events, visit ksubeef.org. For Agriculture Today, I'm Britton Rucker.
Thanks, Britton, and producers looking forward to seeing you at Cattlemen's Day this Friday. Now this week's edition of Tree Tales with K-State Forester Ryan Armbruster. Ryan?
With the recent polar vortex sweeping across much of the country, temperatures dipped a bit below normal here in Kansas, but weren't nearly as cold as parts of the upper Midwest that saw temperatures in the negative 20s and 30s. Similar to the 2014 polar vortex, this prompted some questions about the survival of that destructive invasive pest, the emerald ash borer. In 2014, hopes were that the significantly cold temperatures would cause high mortality in the overwintering EAB larvae, which are known to die in great numbers at very low temperatures. EAB larvae, like many insects, can withstand freezing temperatures by concentrating their bodily fluids, similar to antifreeze, and supercooling. However, this only protects them to a certain point, and once the temperature gets to the neighborhood of 25 below, a large percentage may die. Unfortunately, studies from the last polar vortex showed that even in the northern reaches of the Midwest, EABs survived in large enough numbers to rapidly bounce back in population and resume their destruction of our ash trees. Even though it was much colder than normal, the temperatures in northeast Kansas, where EAB is located in this state, were not nearly cold enough to kill many larvae, which are insulated under the bark until they emerge in May. So, the best hope for our urban and rural forests is not a cold snap that will kill EAB, but instead to concentrate on replacing the doomed ash with a variety of species of trees that will not be impacted as severely by future forest pests. And treatment remains a good option for ash trees, provided that they are within 15 miles of a known infestation, are in good structural condition and vigorous, and are valuable enough to continue treatments for the foreseeable future. This is Ryan Armbruster, Forest Health and Conservation Forester with the Kansas Forest Service, and this has been another Tree Tale.
All right, Ryan, many thanks. Well, Britton is back in just a few moments with this week's Kansas 4-H segment here on Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. The Kansas 4-H Foundation has always been an outlet for youth to dive into hands-on experiences with agriculture and an array of topics. And here to tell us more about the foundation and upcoming events is President and CEO of the 4-H Foundation, Jake Worcester. Jake, can you tell me a little bit about what's the foundation a platform for?
Sure, Britton. Thanks for having me today. It's always great to be here. The foundation, our role, our mission is really to help connect individuals and organizations that want to support the development of young people in Kansas with the opportunity to do that. It's actually a really simple process. And so we look at the foundation as a platform to tell the 4-H story and then to facilitate the opportunity for people to make an investment in young people. It's a fantastic opportunity. It's so much fun for us, and we love the opportunity to help people invest in their communities through young people.
Why should youth be interested and get involved in 4-H?
Well, I'm a product of 4-H, and I love what the program offers. For 115 years, the organization has been all about helping young people learn by doing, getting involved, really getting to experiment, to enjoy learning in an environment with caring adults. There's really not, in my opinion, a better youth organization for helping young people discover what they're interested in, put those skills to work, and really develop not just an opportunity to develop skills in terms of really specific things they may work on, although that's a great benefit as well, but learn to develop their skills in an environment where they're working with other young people, where they're developing relationships with adults, and where they're figuring out how to solve problems in real-world applications. It's just a fantastic organization. I think it's built around all the right principles. And the fun thing is there's an extension office, an extension presence in every county in the state. So no matter where you are, from our most rural counties to our most urban counties, there is an opportunity for young people to be involved in 4-H, to learn about themselves, their head, heart, hands, and health, and to really develop no matter what their interests are.
What's going on in the foundation that's new and upcoming events?
Sure. So the foundation, our opportunity is to really share and promote the growth of 4-H. That's one of our real core missions, is how do we help grow 4-H, make sure young people all across the state of Kansas, any young person who wants to have a 4-H experience can have one. So one of the new programs that we're just rolling out, getting ready to start for the first time, is our Innovation Grant Program. We're making grants available in the amounts of $5,000 to $50,000 to local extension units that may want to go together and partner with neighboring units, others in the 4-H program who want to try something new, who want to experiment. We see a real opportunity when we allow people to dream and to try to do something new and different. And so we want to incentivize that. So that program is rolling out right now. We're excited about what's to come there. And we continue to look for opportunities to partner with the state 4-H program and to bring, again, those individuals and organizations that want to invest in young people the opportunity to do that.
I know you have a summer program at Rock Springs. Go into what the youth will take away from that summer experience.
Sure. A lot of folks around the state know of Rock Springs. And in fact, I'm sure a lot listening here on the program went to Rock Springs as a youth or have sent their kids. We're really fortunate at the Kansas 4-H Foundation to own and operate Rock Springs 4-H Center. And for those who don't know, Rock Springs is an 800-bed camp and retreat facility south of Junction City. It's unfortunately a great hidden secret in Kansas. We wish it wasn't so much a secret. In the summer, for our core mission there is to provide 4-H camp experiences. And we believe camp is a unique opportunity, and 4-H camp particularly is a unique opportunity for youth. More today than ever, youth who come to 4-H camp are, for the first time in their lives often, experiencing time away from home, multiple nights, living with other youth, learning what it means to be in this living group of young people and to navigate eating together and cleaning together and playing together and learning together and just enjoying nature together. And so we provide an opportunity that we don't believe you can get anywhere else. You can't get it by spending the night at a buddy's house down the street. You don't get it at home. You get it by going away and developing an independent opportunity that is unique for a lot of youth. And in the process of having all that fun, learning a lot too. So 4-H camp is going on right now. In fact, a lot of extension units are getting ready to open enrollment and start talking about 4-H camp. So I'd really encourage anyone out there who says, hey, here's an opportunity for my young person, my child, to go and learn, to check that out. We think it's just a tremendous opportunity. So that happens for the most part in June is when our 4-H camp is. And then the other great thing about Rock Springs is we're able to bring in other organizations, other youth organizations, families, church groups, boards to come to Rock Springs and experience a little bit of what 4-H is as other youth or as an adult. And so it's a lot of fun for us to do that. And we're just excited about that. We're open all year round, actually. While our focus is on summer camp experiences, we provide those retreat experiences all year. It's a great way to come out, get disconnected a little bit, enjoy the tall grass prairie, enjoy the second largest spring in the state of Kansas. A lot of people don't know, but at Rock Springs, we're like a little town. We have our own freshwater system. We have our own wastewater system. We maintain our own roads, and we have 69 buildings and 69 roofs to maintain. So it's a ton of fun and a ton of challenge all at the same time, but it's a great place.
And how would one register for the camp in the summer?
All registration happens at the local level. So contact your local extension office or talk to, if you're in a 4-H club, talk to your leader. Many of the local units invite friends of 4-Hers. So in many places, you don't have to be a 4-H member to go to 4-H camp, but it's a great way to introduce your child to 4-H and the experience that there is. But contact your local extension office and learn more.
And a lot of that is building connections between people. How important is that in the real world?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. And everything we do in 4-H is focused on preparing young people for the real world. You know, a lot of folks say 4-H is all about the kids. I actually argue that. I think kids benefit so greatly, and it's so much fun that they get to develop. But what 4-H really is an investment in our communities and an investment in our society. If we want individuals, future leaders who are prepared to solve problems in our communities, in our churches, in our businesses and industry, in our government, then we need to be giving them the tools as young people so that they're ready to contribute when they get out. So I look at 4-H as an opportunity for all of us to invest in our communities and invest in our state and invest in our society. I'm counting on these young people to solve the problems we're going to leave them, and I'm counting on these young people to make sure I can live a safe and happy retirement. So they're smart, they're motivated, they are so good, and if we give them the opportunity to learn and grow, they're going to make life better for all of us.
How would one go ahead and donate to the foundation?
A great way to find us is on our website, kansas4hfoundation.org, the number 4, kansas4hfoundation.org. That's a great place to start. Learn about what we're doing. You can contribute right online there, and we encourage people to do that. We're always looking for new partners. We're always looking for new opportunities to help people who care invest in young people today.
For sure. Well, thanks for coming and talking about the 4-H Foundation.
Thank you so much for having me.
That was Jake Worcester, President and CEO of the Kansas 4-H Foundation. To learn more about the foundation and events happening, visit kansas4hfoundation.org. That's our time for today. For Eric Atkinson, this is Britton Rucker, and this has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.